Every Disney attraction tells a story. Today we're going behind the scenes with Imagineer Kevin Rafferty to learn the stories of some of your favorite attractions.
But the real story behind that is that it didn't start out as Cars Land at all.
Are there any other kind of like Easter eggs you hid in there that maybe people don't notice or haven't discovered?
Nobody knows the story, by the way.
What was kind of the decision making behind that to go after the more recent shorts as that version of Mickey for the attraction?
Story is the driver, the leader, the inspiration. It's everything.
Welcome to the Enchanted Ears podcast,
where we discuss anything and everything Disney.
I'm Angela.
And I'm Joe, and on today's episode, we are very excited to have the chance to talk to former Disney Imagineer Kevin Rafferty about his incredible 40-plus year career at the Walt Disney Company.
I still can't, believe that he actually even talked to us.
I know it's amazing, and you know, he started, and he gets into this a little bit, but he started as a dishwasher at Disneyland and kind of worked his way up at like every job of the company into Imagineering to becoming a show writer, to basically creating and working on like every attraction theme park of our youth. Typhoon Lagoon, Blizzard Beach, Tower of Terror, Mickey Minnie's Runaway Railway, Cars Land.
Yeah.
He redid Carousel Progress. Like, I'm forgetting more than I'm remembering.
Yeah.
And so just to hear the stories of what went into all those attractions and just like his career, and he's super like, he's so positive about everything. Yeah, but he's so positive just about like, he was like, so grateful for everything that happened in his career. It was amazing to kind of talk to him.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the funny thing is, you know, like going through his book, there's so many things that we didn't even get a chance to touch on, like to even graze. So like make sure you go out and buy his book if you don't have it, because he is a person that contains multitudes, and we didn't even get to, like, I could talk to him 10 more times.
Oh yeah,
or more.
easily could talk to him for hours. Just absolutely fascinating to pick his brain. So, and if you're new here, make sure you subscribe, follow the show wherever you get your podcasts. Really helps us grow the community, and we really appreciate it. But without further ado, let's get into the interview with Kevin. We are delighted to be joined today by former Disney Imagineer Kevin Rafferty. Kevin's 40-plus year career saw him work on iconic attractions like the Tower of Terror, Cars Land, and Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. His 2019 autobiography, Magic Journey, which we have a copy of right here, highlights his incredible career, and we are very excited to talk to him today about his journey. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I always love to talk about this stuff.
Excellent. Well, we're very excited to talk to you today. It's always a lot of fun being able to talk to an Imagineer, talk to the people that built the attractions that we love. We are going to kind of throughout this throw in a couple like rapid fire questions. So I'm going to start off with one, because I know you've been known to do a musical performance or two. You talk about one in the book at a benefit for Marty Sklar. So I want to ask you, what would be your go-to karaoke song?
Oh my gosh. Yeah, you're putting me on the spot with that one. Go-to karaoke. The theme song for It's Tough to Be a Bug. We're pollinators. If you like vegetables, fresh fruit, and flowers, give thanks to us bugs for our marvelous powers. If it weren't for the fact that we like to taste, you'd be out there wallowing shoulder high waist. And if all bugs were wiped off the face of the planet, there should be no humans around here to man it. The best thing about us, you can't live without us. Still, it's tough to be a bug.
Wonderful. Perfect.
You know why? 'Cause that's the only one I remember all the lyrics to off the top of my head.
Okay. Well, perfect.
But I guess with karaoke, it doesn't matter because you're looking at the lyrics.
Yeah, you're looking at the words. So would you have a different one if you could look at the words?
Boy. I don't know. There's so many songs out there that I would do, but I don't know. You got me on that, Joe.
Okay. I think your initial pick was a good pick.
You know what?
So.
I think that you should be in the middle of a question later on and just pop out with a whole new world, and then just continue on.
All right. So we'll kind of start at, much like you do in your book. You kind of start at the beginning. You got a job initially as a dishwasher at the Plaza Inn at Disneyland. Was working for Disney like always a goal, always a dream of yours, or was it just kind of something you happened to stumble into?
Well, it's not something I happened to stumble into. I think it was something crazy to say, but I think it was something I was born into. I was always kind of a Disney kid. My mom says that she doesn't believe that I remember this, but the first memory I have is, and I think I was like 1.5 years old, is looking up from my crib and seeing a cardboard cutout of the Casey Jr. train on my wall.
Oh, wow. That
And
is a pretty impressive memory.
I was enamored by that. And we lived in Anaheim, probably 4 or 5 miles down Ball Road in Anaheim. And I remember as a little kid going to sleep listening to the summertime fireworks. And then, of course, we always watched, Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Disney on TV. And I had all the Disney records and, the Disney books and the whole thing. So I kind of started off that way. And then as life kind of progressed, I became interested in kind of like inspired by Walt, if you will. I was kind of inspired by showbiz and stuff, like screenwriting and songwriting and film production, and I made my own animated films with my dad's 8 millimeter camera, and I love TV shows and movies, and while other kids were playing stickball on the street, I was having haunted ride-throughs in my garage at Hollywood at Halloween time in a little
Nice.
red wagon kind of thing. So,
Oh, nice.
so it was always, and my mom was in showbiz when she was a little girl, and I think I kind of got that from her. But to make a long story short, what I really wanted to do was become an animator at the Walt Disney Studios, and so I thought, well, I'll get my foot in the door and I'll start working at Disneyland. It wasn't far away, and of course, I love the park. And I was an art major at the time at Cal State Fullerton, and so I thought I could just walk in the door at Disneyland and become an artist there right away. But they stuck me in the dish room instead. So that's kind of how all that worked out. But it all worked out great because I was glad every job I ever had with Disney, I started at the very bottom of the barrel. In fact, when I went up to WED in 1978, I took a 50-cent cut in pay to work at WED from Disneyland and had to drive 50 extra miles to get there. So
Oh, wow.
yeah, it was all kind of crazy. So no, I didn't happen to just fall into it. I always wanted to work for Disney. And then when I actually got an interview at the Walt Disney Studios, I think it was an interview to be an in-betweener for The Fox and the Hound or some movie they were working on at the time. And then I ended up seeing back in the costuming area at Disneyland a little poster where they were recruiting for artists and designers to work on a new project called Epcot Center. And so I never had my interview at the studio. I went up and interviewed at WED at the time up in Glendale, home of the Imagineers, and the rest is kind of history. That's kind of where it all started. And I actually had a better job at Disneyland, but I started at the bottom of the barrel at WED, and that's how it was.
Worked with. So I was going to ask you, it's kind of a good segue of why did you decide to make that transition to WED? And I guess it's interesting because you had an opportunity potentially as an animator, which is something you wanted to do. So why did you kind of make that change?
Well, because that's a good question. But I kind of really fell in love with the parks, with Disneyland especially, because I was working there. And I had a really hard job. And after my shift, which would oftentimes be a 10 or a 12 or 14-hour shift, I'd work a lot of double time in the summertime. Late at night after the park closed, I used to roam around and sneak into the back of like Pirates of the Caribbean and the Haunted Mansion and kind of check out how everything worked. And the maintenance people back there would show me around. And I kind of fell in love with that whole side of the company. And even though I didn't become an actual animator at the Walt Disney Studios, I get to work on a lot of animated projects at Imagineering. So it all kind of came full circle. I kind of got to do everything I wanted to do there.
Yeah, it was a good blend of everything.
Yeah.
And you mentioned you joined as part of the Epcot team when kind of Disney was expanding for Epcot. You mentioned you kind of started at the bottom of the barrel. So like, what were some of your early jobs kind of on that first project?
Well, I didn't like the job, but I loved the company, and it actually, circumstance worked it out that I started in actually the right place. And the reason I say that is because, to answer your question, my first job was to I wanted to be an artist and a designer, but I didn't get to be. But what I got to do was work with the artists and the designers at Wet Enterprises at the time, and I would dry mount their art and cut their mats and set up conference rooms for their meetings and clean up after them and set up chairs and stuff like that. And the reason why that was so wonderful is because a lot of the people who actually designed and built Disneyland, like Claude Coates and Sam McKim and Harper Goff and John Hench and Harriet Burns and Herbie Ryman and even Mark Davis was there at the time. They came in to me, who was a nobody, to get me to mount and dry mount and mat their artwork.
Okay.
And while I was doing that, think about this. I was the first one to get to see the concept sketches. Because when they
Okay.
when they would finish them, they would come downstairs to where I was and say,
Yeah.
"Hey, Kev," like Herbie, "Hey, Kev, I'm doing this thing for a thing called the American Adventure, and I need a mat around it because we're doing a presentation." And well, what is that? And then he would explain, because these guys love their job so much and they love their work so much. And Harriet Burns, who was, she started at the studio on the Mickey Mouse Club, and she ended up coming over being a model builder, and the model shop was right next to the area where I work, and so she would tell me everything she was working on. And so I got to learn through them. They loved talking about what they were doing, and you can imagine being the first person to ever hear I was the first person to see any of these concept sketches before they even went to presentation. And the beautiful thing about the time in those days was, how now everything's digital and everybody does a digital artwork and all that. Back in those days, they used pencil and pastel and oil paint. And I remember walking upstairs to deliver the finished artwork, smelling linseed oil and oil paint upstairs with all the artists painting on canvas or on flat board that I would, mount and mat for them. And they would just kind of take me under their wing and talk about all the stuff they were working on. And so even though, to kind of circle back on this, I was at the very bottom of the barrel, I wasn't. I was really on top of the barrel because I got to learn and hear all the stories from all these people that knew Walt Disney, that worked for Walt Disney, that created Disneyland. And they loved to talk about it, and I loved to hear about it.
Yeah, that had to be kind of such a special time because you
Yes.
were there as kind of like the first wave of Imagineers. We're still there and maybe kind of like finishing up their career. You're kind of part of that like
Right.
second wave that came in. And yeah, I could only imagine just to like hear their stories, and especially someone like
Yes.
you who would like sneak in after hours and like see how stuff was built to then like talk to the people that actually created that stuff.
Yeah, and I also, on my break time, it was very strict in those days. You had a 15-minute break, 10 o'clock, 10:15. And I used to go over to the Maple building where Maple was building all the animatronic figures for Epcot Center, they call it at the time. And I used to watch the figures being built for the World of Motion Pavilion and Spaceship Earth and all that. I watched those things being built on my breaks, and it was just the greatest thing in the world.
Wow. I mean, was that nightmare fuel though? Because I mean, I've seen some of those things without their skin on it, and oof.
No, well, it wasn't really nightmarish because I kind of knew the concept. The guys always had the concept art around them, what they were supposed to look like, and the sculpts
Yeah.
and things like that. So I knew what they were becoming, but it was fascinating to see how they got there with that. And then I was like, where I worked, it was called Special Services, was in the very middle of the building. So that's where all the activity was. So I got to, hear a lot of the music production that was going on for the parks and just be in the heartbeat, in the center of the whole thing that was going on. I mean, even though I was kind of a nobody, I was just a kid starting out. I was right in the center of all the activity, all around me. The main model shop was, like I said, right outside the area where I worked, and they had the giant model of Epcot being built there. And it was a tremendous time to be there. And to think about it, when I started, and you're right, Joe, we were the second generation of Imagineers coming in. A lot of the first generation people were still there, and we got to learn from them. But I was the second generation coming in, and they were anxious to kind of tell us what was going on and teach us. You don't learn this stuff in school, right?
Right.
You
Right.
learn
Yeah.
from those that paid their dues and did it. And when I started, think about it, there were only two theme parks in the world. There was Disneyland and the Magic Kingdom. In two Disney theme parks, I should say. There was Disneyland and the Magic Kingdom in Florida. And I was just, I got to say, I was truly blessed to be there for the next almost 43 years with the addition of everything, cruise ships and more parks and resorts and shows and you name it. And it started, on the foundation of those who actually designed and built Disneyland. Minnie, as you know, came from the studio, so hearing all those
Right.
stories as well, and hearing stories about Walt from the people that knew him and loved him and
Yeah.
worked with him, it was like I knew Walt myself. It was just fantastic.
And that was incredibly generous of those Imagineers. I feel like
Yeah.
to teach the next generation, because you're right. Like it's so much of it is, they went through it. And sometimes like people could have, well, I went through it. You got to learn it on your own. Like for them to say like, hey, this is how you do it. This is, kind of the story, like keep that culture going, is something amazing in and of itself.
Well, I think because they loved it so much,
Mm-hmm.
they created it. They
They want to see
learned,
it. Yeah.
yeah, they learned how to do it, and they knew that it was an enormous responsibility and a privilege and an honor to keep that. I mean, Walt said Disneyland will never be complete as long as there's imagination in the world. Well, that's the Imagineers. And the first generation Imagineers wanted to make sure that they left everything in really good hands because, they got it started and they set the precedent and they, put the shovel in the dirt and got the thing built and went from what I call the spark to the park with everything that they
I
did.
like that.
And they, they wanted to make sure that this was going to be left in good hands. And we wanted to be sure that we learned it so that it would be in good hands. Because guess what? We were there too because we loved it. We loved the park and we loved the company and we loved what the company stood for and what they did. And I would be driving, my 50 miles in my beat up old car to Wet every day going, am I really doing this? Am I really like still, a little kid laying in my bed listening to fireworks and I fell asleep and this is all a dream? It's just, I have to tell you guys, I never took a single moment of those almost 43 years for granted. Never, ever, ever. It was never really a job. And I oftentimes went back to the things like Claude Coates and Herbie Ryman and some of those guys would say, and they kind of stuck forever. They're fundamentals of Disney theme park design specifically. It was about storytelling and immersion and stepping into the stories. And I learned some of the things that worked with them and some of the things that did not. And to this day, one of my favorite all-time attractions is Peter Pan because those guys had a postage stamp of real estate to put that thing in, and they had to pull out the stops with everything they had with their skills of showmanship and storytelling and staging and perspective, and it was just a brilliant thing, and they had no money to do it. And so I always was very inspired by that, and in the years to come with all of my projects, I never wanted to settle for anything less than excellence because they worked miracles. They really did.
Yeah, it's so impressive. Speaking of story, how did you eventually move into show writing, or like what was it like learning from those original Imagineers about that?
I'm not really a writer, but don't tell anybody. But I guess I kind of am because I spent years doing it. But
Yep.
it's kind of an interesting story because, as I mentioned, I was in special services, and I'd be emptying trash cans and do all that kind of stuff. Well, there was a vice president of creative named Randy Bright. He actually started at Disneyland on the Columbia. And Randy worked alongside with Marty Sklar and John Hench at the time on Epcot and the other projects. And Randy was kind of in charge of creative development, of new ideas. And he wrote the American Adventure Show and things like that. So he was also a show writer. And when I said I wanted to be an animator early on, I thought I needed to be an artist, but what I really needed to be was a storyteller. But I didn't know that. Randy kind of pulled that out of me. So to answer your question, I went. They needed somebody to work in the scope department, and scopes were written descriptions that would describe everything in the new projects going on, from lineal length of track to how many stalls in the area restrooms to the type of vehicles and the ride systems and all that. So I worked with a little team to keep all that information current in scopes. And in order to do that, get this, I got to sit in all the concept meetings with all the designers and the engineers and the architects, listening to their thinking and their brainstorming and what they were going to do just to keep the scopes current. And Randy would oftentimes come to these meetings because he was the head of creative at the time, and he would see me squirming in the corner, because I wasn't one of them. I wasn't worthy to sit at the table. I was just taking notes for my scopes. And one day, out of the blue, Randy says, "Kevin, what do you think?" And because I sat there, like biting my tongue, oh, I wish I could say something. Oh, I wish I could contribute to this. And I never had the opportunity. He said, "What do you think?" And I was like spewing it out. I was like, whoa, oh, and he kind of liked what I said. And so I was actually working in the project management department then in estimating. That's where the scope writers work. And Randy said, "Hey, can you stop by my office at 3 o'clock? I'm working on this crazy idea where Mickey fights the forces of evil. He's standing on Sleeping Beauty Castle, and this inflatable Maleficent comes out of the moat, and all And he was working on the beginnings of Phantasmic, and then he would call me in and he'd say, "Hey, I don't know why he took me under his wing, but he'd say, 'Hey, I'm working on this idea for this freak snowstorm where this blizzard comes in and it becomes a water park.'" And so to make a long story short, I worked for Randy Bright for about a year and a half on my own time because I had a full-time job. So I worked at nights and on the weekends, and Randy asked me to name a bunch of stuff and to work on a bunch of stuff, and he ended up pulling me in to work on Blizzard Beach. I'm sorry, Typhoon Lagoon. Blizzard Beach came later. And one day I was thinking, I wonder if I have the guts to go into Randy's office and ask if I could be into creative, because the backstory of that is when I first got my interview at WED Enterprises at the time, I wanted to be into creative. I wanted to be a designer, but they kind of, no, you're gonna that kind of thing. And so Randy, I went in and I said, "Hey, Randy, do you think I have the chops to, maybe become a show writer in the creative division?" And he said, "Funny you said that, because I was going to ask you if you wanted to do that." It's like, my head exploded. And so I worked on Typhoon Lagoon. I, named every attraction in Typhoon Lagoon and helped Randy with the story and develop that. And my first project was as an official show writer, creating a show and writing songs, was the Pan-Galactic Pizza Port for Tokyo Disneyland with Tony Schiavone and all that stuff. And the rest is kind of history. And like I said earlier, I think it was because I was such a creative kid and I was interested in so many different things, and I could not ever have been in a better place than I was to be able to allow all these kind of things inside me that wanted to get out. It was just the greatest opportunity in the world, and it was petrifying and terrifying. But if it was easy, anybody could do it. But I just love the challenge of it.
Have you ever considered another career as like a motivational speaker? I've heard a lot of the good catchphrases, "I get to," and then I'm gonna put in the extra time. You just said something else that I literally just slipped out of my mind. But wow, it is. I feel like I'm gonna Kool-Aid man through this wall behind me right now.
Well, thank you for saying so. But it's just been kind of my style of creative leadership in later years. When I would cook up an idea for an attraction and then lead the team, I never led the team personally. It wasn't me. It wasn't me saying, "Go do this and go do that." I always let the story of the attraction, I always let the vision answer all the questions, lead the team, and I kind of deferred the leadership away from me and onto what the purpose and the vision and the story of the attraction was, and how did it enhance that. And that a good example of that was the last project I worked on before I retired was Mickey Minnie's Runaway Railway, and we had such a solid vision for that story and how to do it and the art direction and everything. I'm not going to say it was easy to lead, but it was strong enough and solid enough to always fall back onto what it was going to be. You have to understand in your head what it's going to look like on opening day before you even break ground. You have to know what that is. And so back to the kind of motivational speaking thing is I would do my best to be the motivational speaker for the team that pulled this off. Just to kind of continue that thought, if you think about what else was going on at the time of Mickey and Minnie's at Disney's Hollywood Studio in Florida, there was this little project going on called Star Wars Galaxy's Edge, which kind of like a giant black hole sucked up all the resources at Imagineering and all the, focus and attention from upper management. And I had this little attraction that I sold and wanted to get built, and had to kind of put together a little ragtag team of a lot of people that had never worked on attractions before. And boy, when they came out the other side of that thing, they could do anything.
Wow.
Kind of question, since you brought up Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway. It's interesting because that is based on the more recent Mickey shorts and not necessarily
Right.
like the classic version of Mickey. So what was kind of the decision making behind that to go after the more recent shorts as that version of Mickey for the attraction?
Well, to back way up for a second, Disney's Hollywood Studio, where the original idea was intended for, wanted to put something new in the Great Movie Ride.
Mm-hmm.
And the Great Movie Ride, played out for several years. It was a great attraction. Everybody loved it, but they wanted to put something new in there. And then somebody said, well, maybe we should have more of a presence for Mickey in this park. So the question out there was, how do we bring Mickey into Disney's Hollywood Studio and possibly put him in the Great Movie Ride? And as an Imagineer, especially somebody that's kind of given the opportunity to come up with new ideas, there's a need. The park has a need to do that. And so that means there's a good chance that something like this may happen, but there wasn't an idea and there wasn't a story. And with Mickey, over my almost 43 years at Imagineering, there were many ideas for Mickey attractions, but none of them really stuck. They didn't really stick, and so this was kind of a huge challenge. And so I came up with this crazy idea that had to do with Mickey and Minnie going on a picnic, but all these things kept going in their way, and by golly, they're really going to have their picnic now. So it was called Perfect Picnic, and the scene opens up. You're in a movie theater, and you're here to see the premiere of Perfect Picnic, and the curtains open up, and Mickey's singing to Minnie in the boat, and he decides to start the motor. Nobody knows this story, by the way. He decides to start the motor on the back of the boat, and the motor becomes anthropomorphic. It becomes a character and gets away from him and heads toward the screen and just rips through the screen, and through special effects, all the water in the lake fills the theater, and your seats begin to become buoyant and they float into the lake and end up going down this rushing river, and you go over the falls, and that's how it starts.
Oh,
Oh,
wow.
wow.
And so that was the kind of the sales pitch where I went in and got some initial funding to kind of do that. That was the original idea. Well, guess what happened then? I forgot the exact year it was, but after Cars Land opened, we had Luigi's Flying Tires, and management came to me and said, "Hey, Kev, here's $20. Go to Luigi's. We're going to clean that blacktop off Luigi's and come up with something new." Well, I was like, just starting on this Mickey thing, but they wanted me to do this, and I love Cars Land so much, and I had to do this, So I went away and kind of cooked up the idea for Luigi's Rollickin' Roadsters, where his cousins come from Carousel and do the dance and do the thing like that. So I put full attention on that, which was a very rare thing for me because I always had a lot of stuff going on. Anyway, they gave the Mickey idea to another team, and as it turned out, the theaters that it's very difficult to design an attraction because you have hourly capacity, you have maintenance, you have so many factors to consider, and dispatch intervals and all that. Well, it turned out that they didn't have enough room to build the theaters it required to float the seats, to go through the screen, and to do all this kind of stuff. It would have required like 19 cast members, and the park didn't want to support that. And when I finished with Luigi's Rollickin' Roasters, I happened to be coming back to Glendale to my office the day that the other team was going to present the idea for Mickey's. Well, there wasn't a storyline. I recognized right away it was a big series of events where you get blown up into the sky through the firework factory, and it was very kind of Toontown-ish, right? And they pitched that to management, and management didn't like it. They didn't get it. The management at the studio park said, we can't support this. It's going to take too many cast members, and now it's too expensive, so they pulled the plug on it. So that's when I kind of broke my heart because I thought it'd be great to put this thing in there. And so I went and I grabbed my partner in creative crime, my colleague, Robert Coltrane, who we came up with Toy Story Midway Mania together, Raider Springs Racers, and many other things. I said, Robert, will you support me if I go to management and say we have 3 months to come up with an idea for this? He said, I'm with you. So I went to management. I said, fund us for 3 months. All this attraction needs is a story. We'll get back to you. And so Robert and I went to work. We shut the door in my office, threw papers all around, and did storyboards and all kinds of crazy stuff. And it dawned on me that, you know what? If you think about this attraction's kind of in the heart of the park. Mickey was born on a train. Walt loved trains. We should really think about the heritage of Mickey in his life and honor Mickey in a certain way. And you know, with coming up with the story for Tower of Terror, I always loved ride vehicles that you knew as a human being what they were, like an elevator. You know what an elevator does. You know how an elevator behaves. But what sold the idea is the elevator breaks free of the shaft, travels horizontally across the floor into the Twilight Zone. Nobody would expect that. And so trains and Mickey and Walt, I was thinking, wouldn't it be fun? We board a cartoon train into the cartoon world, and the train breaks apart and has a mind of its own with all that logic and comedy and all that kind of stuff. And so Robert and I ended up putting together the whole story for Mickey and Minnie's in 3 months' time, put storyboards together, went back to management, and they gave us the green light. So that's kind of how that started, and to answer your question, Joe, about the new style of the Mickey cartoon shorts, I love the new cartoon shorts at the time. I love the comedy, I love the cadence, I love the music and the color and everything about them, and I love the music. Christopher Willis he composed like 100 new pieces of music for that show, and I thought, what if Mickey and Minnie are still trying to go on this picnic, but we bring a train into the picture, and the art direction of it is exactly like the art direction from the film, or from the shorts, and the music is the same. So I asked Chris Willis to come in and help compose a new theme song, and Joseph Holt was the original art director for the original shorts, and Paul Rudish, and we got them involved and took them through our story. Of course, they loved it, and Chris Willis, a composer, was totally on board with writing the new music for it. And again, you know, following the rules of the design of that, you had to feel as a guest like you were entering into the world of a Mickey cartoon short, into that style of world. And that was the rule that we followed through opening day, and that's kind of how all that happened.
Now, that's amazing. I want to ask about, you mentioned the original design, like that floating kind of theater. Was that, like, how far along did you get in the design? Like, did you know if that would even work? Like
how do you make this thing float?
Yeah.
Joe, here's the thing. When you come up with an idea for something, you never think it's going to work. You never know how it's going to work. Okay. You know, you just I mean, you should have seen the animators and ride engineers when I went in and told them for Radiator Springs Racers, Mater has to travel backwards and talk to you every 10.3 seconds. And then he resets, and he does it again, and then he resets, and people's jaws were hitting the floor, and nobody ever knows how these things are going to work.
Okay.
But is somehow people come together, the greatest minds in the world, Imagineering, and they love the challenge of it, and they somehow get it to work. So no, I didn't have any idea. I was just like shooting in the dark, man. Somehow somebody would figure it out. Okay. That's how it's always been.
That kind of leads to a little bit of a follow-up question of, like, you know, you're writing the story. You're kind of like the writer of the attraction.
Mm-hmm.
How much does that story factor into, you know, the mechanics of the ride? So like you said, like, you're kind of just coming up with an idea and then figuring it out later, or, you know, do you have to kind of like modify the story to fit the ride vehicle you have, kind of those limitations? Like, how does that all kind of work together?
Now you're talking to a show writer at heart who will tell you that story is everything. Story is the driver, the leader, the inspiration. It's everything. And so as opposed to coming up with technology first, which I guess sometimes happens, you come up with the story beats first, the storyboard. You have no idea how any of this is going to work or how it's going to happen, but that's what drives it. The story dictates that an elevator car is going to break free of the shaft and travel horizontally into the darkness of the Twilight Zone. The story was what led that, and it ultimately gave, that what it needed to be in the heads of all the engineers that had to figure this out. It wouldn't have happened any other way.
Okay.
The story is that the train in Mickey Minnie's Runaway Railway has to establish itself as a real train as it's pulling into the station. But somehow it has to all break apart and do crazy things and then all come back together at the end. That's what the story suggested.
I never realized that the reason why those two rides specifically are so brilliant is they basically operate off of the premise of like situational irony, right? Like you're saying how something is supposed to operate, you expect it to operate this way, and then it breaks free of what you are expecting, which then creates like this repeat like enjoyment factor for the audience, us as the audience. And then like the other thing, I'm taking a second to fangirl a little bit. The other thing is I love like in Mickey and Minnie's Runaway Railway, how you also have like a B and a C story as well. Chubby is one of my all-time favorite. Like I got off that ride and immediately said, "Who is the bird? I need to know everything about the bird." Like I go in through the scenes. I'm like, is he in that scene? Is he in that scene? Is he in every scene? Where is he? So
I
can you
love
just like
that
talk?
so much. I love that so much. My son just bought me a Chubby popcorn bucket. Anyway, so
nice.
I have Chubby all over the place around here. You're right. This is one of the few Disney attractions ever in the history of the universe that has not only a beginning to end story, but a B story and a little C nod to a new character named Chubby.
Mm-hmm.
And the A story, of course, it's about Mickey and Minnie going on a picnic. Of course, something terribly goes wrong, and they have to get everything back together again before they can get on the picnic. The B story is in the little pre-show video where they're singing "Nothing Can Stop Us Now," and they're so happy about going on their picnic, they're throwing everything in the trunk of their car, including Pluto, without even knowing that. They hit the railroad track. Pluto goes flying in the air with the pie, and so Pluto, the dutiful dog, realizes that his responsibility is throughout the entire attraction to get that picnic basket back to Mickey and Minnie's because they're all going on a picnic. And so if you look carefully, the way it's designed is you will not always see Pluto in the B story, the way your train car is positioned and the way it's staged and all that. But if you look carefully, you can see Pluto with the picnic basket trying to get back to Mickey and Minnie during the whole attraction. And the reason for Chubby's success is because a lot of times when you're designing an attraction, you don't know timing-wise exactly how it's going to work. Although we have new tools with VR goggles and timing and things, you can kind of get that sense. But I realized, when we got the train car vehicles in the field and we were programming them and doing the choreography for them, that the vehicles may have to wait for the vehicle in front to unload, and I always like to use that as an opportunity for a little bit more entertainment, like I did with the little butt bug, and it's tough to be a bug at the end, with the little, and that's why I wanted to put the little jolt in your seat while you're waiting to unload, where Goofy says, "Oh, what does this button do?" And you feel that little thing. That was a last minute ad, and adding more Chubby animation up in the barn window was a last minute ad because he was such a darn cute character, and it'd be fun to just do little kind of visual gags up there for him, and he ended up becoming like a real popular little guy.
Yeah, he is. Yeah, he is.
Yeah,
Are there the whole attraction is visually stunning. There's
brilliant.
a lot of stuff going on, as you mentioned, Pluto kind of hidden in there. Are there any other kind of like Easter eggs you hid in there that maybe people don't notice or haven't discovered?
Like millions and millions. We don't have enough time to talk about all of them, and there's more hidden Mickeys in there than in both Florida and at Disneyland in Anaheim. There's more hidden Mickeys, so that's part of it. But there are a lot of Easter eggs.
Maybe what's your favorite? Maybe what was like your favorite Easter egg?
Well, my beloved show producer Sharita Carter, who was the show producer for the attraction, and we worked so well together, and she's so fantastic. And her little hobby was, we would work crazy hours. We would work like, I don't know, 16-hour days, 7 days a week for a month at a time. We just work like crazy because that's what Imagineers do. But Sharita's little escape, what she loved to do is she was a photographer, an art photographer by heart, and she would fly out or drive up to Yosemite in crazy hours and crazy snow and take her photographs like Ansel Adams. And so her second love besides Disney uh, theme park stuff is photography. And so if on the Florida attraction, if you go through you pass Jackhammer Pete and you're heading into Daisy's Dance Studio and you're downtown, if you look at the corner shop on the other side of where Donald Duck is in the truck honking his horn, that shop is called Carter's Cameras. So that was a little nod to
Okay.
Sharita. And sometimes we just do that, and we don't get permission or we don't ask them. We just do it. In fact, well, I helped the Anaheim Mickey and Minnie's team get started with the whole storyline and through the front door and the El Capitan and all that kind of stuff. And we had all the music recorded and the voice recorded and everything else like that. But another team was put together to build the one in Disneyland because I had to live full time in Florida with Sharita, the producer, and the team to get that done. And what they did for me, and I would come home on occasion, and I would go over there and go through a hard hat walkthrough with the team. And one day I did a true double take when I was walking through, and in that very same spot where Carter's Cameras is, they put Kevin's Aloha Ha Shirts shop. So that little
Very
shop
well
is in
named.
that attraction for a long, long, long time.
Amazing.
Incredible.
Well, we're gonna get into some of the more attractions that you worked on, but want to throw in a couple other like rapid fire questions here, kind of some of your favorites. So, what is your favorite Disney snack?
Oh, without a doubt, it's what's the what's
Without a
the
doubt, I have
pineapple
no idea.
snack over at
Dole Whip.
what is
Dole
it?
Whip?
Yeah, Dole Whip. Why couldn't I remember that? I'm getting old, guys.
It
I've been
happens to me all the
retired for
time.
4 years. My brain is about yes, Dole Whip. And the other thing was when I was working on projects in the Magic Kingdom, the second favorite dessert was they had in the Adventureland area they had what was called the 50-50, which was half the orange and half vanilla, like the 50-50 kind of
Yeah, like a
bar,
swirl. Yeah.
like a swirl. I love that too.
Yeah,
Yep, on the side of ice cream.
I was just gonna ask, are you a straight pineapple Dole Whip person, or are you for the swirl? Because we're swirl fans.
Are you swirl fans?
Yeah.
We're the
Well,
we're the pineapple swirl ones.
when it comes to the Dole Whip, I'm a straight pineapple swirl, but the other one I don't even know what that was called, but it was orange and vanilla, which was
I know what you're talking. That's at the Sunshine Terrace, I think.
yes,
Over there.
exactly.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
I
I know
don't know
what
that
you're
I've
talking
ever
about.
had that
Yeah, I
one.
don't know that we've gone that. That has the
Yeah.
orange bird on there. So
Yeah, we'll have to get that one.
Oh, you have to try that.
yeah.
Yeah. Which Disney park feels the most like home to you?
Ah, boy. Well, I'd have to say, as much as I love Disney's Hollywood Studio, because I contributed and got to have the privilege of putting so much into that park, as well as kind of Disney California Adventure after it opened. I didn't work on that park before it opened, but I did work on a lot of the stuff after it opened. But I have to say, because I started my career there, it's Disneyland. Disneyland will always have the number one place in my heart because like I said, I grew up down the street from there. I can go into my backyard right now and see it 9 miles away. See the Matterhorn. We can see the fireworks from the backyard.
Wow.
That's incredible.
And I watched Cars Land being built from my backyard when I was home, which I wasn't too much, but it's in my neighborhood. It's home. It's home away from home.
So how often now, since you live so close to it, how often now do you still go back to the parks?
Do you know that I used to go more in my younger days when my kids were growing up than I do now? It was, back in the old days, we had a silver pass and you could just go down there. Hey, you want to go to Disneyland? Let's go. We'll go down there for a couple hours and we'd sign in and all that. Now they have the reservation system and a lot of other things. And my wife and I have been busy doing so many things since I'm busier now in retirement than I was when I was working 100 hours a week as an Imagineer. I was just there a few weeks ago And I just went to see the new Walt Disney show in the Opera House on Main Street. My wife worked there, by the way. She worked in the parking lot, and she worked at Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln and the Walt Disney Story back in the day. So it's kind of fun to see Walt's figure. And I went over, and the team invited us to come over and see the show. So I was there recently. But I spent so much time at both parks. My wife worked there for 10 years, almost 11 years. And I worked in foods there. I worked at, as you know, in the Plaza Inn, and then went over to Club 33 and worked at Club 33 for a couple of years. And so it was just like home. I wish I could go more. In fact, it's funny you said that, because just yesterday, my wife Patty said, we need to get to Disneyland more. And I said, you're right.
Yep.
You're right.
Did you guys meet at Disneyland? Or did you
Well, we didn't actually meet at Disneyland, but get this. So when I was working in the dish room, when they first hired me, they hired me for the bakery, which the shift started at 3 a.m. And I thought, oh boy, I'll be making cheesecakes and doing all kinds of stuff. And they stuck me in the dish room instead. And so about a week later, my best friend Mark, who I grew up with, got the job at the bakery. So he was like, in my face, he's in the bakery, and I was washing dishes, so he got the better job. And not only that, he met this girl that he liked named Patty, who worked at Coke Corner on Main Street, with hot dogs and Cokes. Well, that ended up becoming my wife. But anyway, Patty didn't want anything to do with Mark, so she kind of palmed him off on her best friend Evelyn, and they ended up getting married.
Oh.
So I didn't know Patty at the time. I heard of her, but I didn't know her. And then on one of Mark's, he still lived at home. One of his birthday parties, he invited his girlfriend Evelyn to come to his birthday party, and she brought along Patty because they were best friends in high school. That's how I met her, is at Mark's house.
Wow.
And then we found out we both worked at Disneyland together. And then we found out we went to the same college together, and then we just kept running into each other all the time. And
What a
so it was
story.
just like meant to be, and in fact, a little side note story to that, she was with me when I saw the little poster with the Mickey hats where Mickey said, I need you, or I want you. And then this is when they were, recruiting for designers. And I had the interview lined up at the studio, and Patty says, why don't you go to this one instead? This is like the people that build the parks. I said, yeah, I love the parks. And she kind of turned the tide on that. So that's kind of how all that played out.
Wow.
Well, so we should pull her into this interview. We have her as much to thank as you.
Yeah. Oh, as I come from a Disney family too, because her sister at the time was a dancer at the Golden Horseshoe, and she was in a lot of the parades. Her brother worked at the French Market. He's a doctor now, but back in the day he worked at the French Market, and my son and his wife work for Disney now. And so in my home office here, I have a little black and white framed photograph hanging on the wall of like days before opening day in 1955, because Disneyland has played so much a part of my life. And just think, if it wasn't for that park, I wouldn't have the life I have in any way, right?
Yeah. That's
That
amazing.
is
Everything that I
wild thought.
kind of became and wanted, and my marriage and my kids and my career and everything was because of Disneyland.
Wow. That's amazing to kind of think about.
That is.
Speaking of your career, you got to work on a lot of amazing attractions. One of them was MuppetVision 3D. You actually got to work with Jim Henson kind of on that story. Could you talk a little bit, like, what was that experience like working with him to kind of develop that show?
Jim Henson was, of course, everybody knew his work before that time. And the little backup story from that was that when the Disney Hollywood Studio Park opened, it was quite frankly, it was too small. There wasn't enough to do. And it was going to take us, several years to build new attractions like Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. And so we needed to work on things that we could get, in quickly. And so that's where MuppetVision 3D came along. And so we invited Jim Henson and his team in to brainstorm with us. And I think at that time, Bill Prady, who was a writer on The Muppet Show, and some people like that came in. And we cooked up the idea for MuppetVision 3D. And Jim was in some of those sessions. And and if he didn't like something, you knew that. But he had such a gentle, wonderful way of... He was just the most amazing person, really he was. He was so wonderful and so gentle. And I remember in a brainstorming meeting, it kind of reminded me of the old Randy Bright days where I wanted to say something, and then I said, what if Miss Piggy is like the Statue of Liberty? And then other than that, and Jim says, oh, that's great, that's really fun, and and then he kept saying, we got to put this new character Bean Bunny in, we got to put Bean Bunny in, and it was just like a bunch of kids at a birthday party were so excited about the potential for MuppetVision 3D and how quickly we could get it done. And working with Jim and his team on that was just, it's hard to describe. It was just, a project that was meant to be with such a great team of creative people who were very respectful of each other. And I have to say that, by the way, of all Imagineers, they're just generally just really good people. So it was like really good people meeting with really good people to come up with a really good and fun project. So I can't say anything negative or bad about that. It was just a great experience. And by the way, just to kind of set the record, when Imagineers work on new ideas like that, we always have like 10 other things going on at the same time. It's very rare when we work on one thing. We have things in various forms of development, from the beginning of brainstormings to what this thing could be, to production in the field kind of thing, and programming and installing audio and all that kind of stuff. So we, and the Henson people were very busy at the time too, so we met kind of infrequently, but the idea gelled pretty quickly, and they ran off and with the script and worked with our creative executives, and kind of the rest is history. And I thought it came out really fun, and Jim Henson got his Bean Bunny.
He did. It was a great show. Kind of as a follow-up to that, again, you worked on a variety of parks, a variety of attractions. Any other kind of like memorable experiences or like celebrity encounters? Like, I know you worked on Rock and Roller Coaster. I don't know if you got to work with Aerosmith at all in any way on that.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
Okay. Well, I've had really the honor of working with a lot of celebrities, doing voice work and different things like that. But you brought up specifically Rock and Roller Coaster with Aerosmith, and there is a funny story related to that. So my son Kevin Jr., who's now a manager in communications at Imagineering, and he really does a great job. He was a little kid at the time. I forgot how old he was, maybe 8, 9, 10. And I actually got to fly on the Disney corporate jet to Boston to do a recording session with Aerosmith and Steven Tyler and all those guys. And man, that was pretty special. And then they invited me to the Hollywood Bowl because they were doing a big concert there, and we got like super front row seats, and I lost my hearing for like a week. But anyway, the story I wanted to tell you is, if you remember the pre-show where Ileana Douglas is their manager, and she tells them, that they have to get over right away, and so they invite everybody to the concert in their super special limo and all that kind of stuff. We shot that in Hollywood, on a soundstage in Hollywood on a Saturday, and Jerry Reese directed that. He directed a lot of things for us in our parks, and he directed that. But we shot it in ShowScan, and ShowScan is so bright that the way it happens is film goes by the lens so quickly that you have to pump more light in, because it travels through twice as fast as regular film, like whatever it is, 34 frames per second or something like that. So they had to pump a lot of light in. And so Jerry, when he was directing the band to do that pre-show video, was one take. And they kept messing it up because they kept squinting because the light was so bright. Jerry kept saying, "Cut, no squinting, no squinting." So they needed a break. Went through like 12 takes. And so anyway, I brought my son to the recording just because I try to educate him and different things like that. It was a Saturday, and I said, "Come along with me, but you have to sit here in this chair and sit in the dark, and you don't want to ask questions, don't do anything, just watch." So he thought that was really great. Well, during one of the breaks, Steven Tyler comes out, and he says, "Who's this guy?" And I said, "Well, that's my son." And he says, "That's your son?" He says, "Well, I'm going to borrow him for a minute." And I said, "Well, what are you going to do?" And he says, "Well, I'm going to go teach him the facts of life." And I said, "Wait a minute, what? This famous rocker?" And so he grabs him, and they like disappear, and I'm just totally paranoid. And on the drive home later, I said, "What did he tell you?" And he says, "This is what life's all about, kid. Chocolate cake and fast cars." And that's what he said. Anyway, the story to that is that before we left, they were hitting it off really well, Steven Tyler and my son. And so I took a picture of the two of them, which I still have. And so years later, when he grew up, he went to a little concert at the Orange County Fair, and there were some people sitting next to him talking about how much they like Aerosmith, and that this guy was bragging. He said, I was like 16 rows away from the stage, and Steven Tyler was like in my face. I was 16 rows away. It was the most amazing thing. And Kevin Jr. said, oh, so you like Aerosmith? And they said, oh, we love Aerosmith. And they said, have you ever been to one of their concerts? And he says, oh, yeah, I've been to their concert. And the guy says, well, how close were you to Steven Tyler? And he actually carried that picture in his wallet. He said, this close! They're like holding each other.
Oh, that's a great story.
Oh, man, I bet the other guy's mind exploded.
And then, oh, it did. And I have another quick kind of celebrity story if you got a second on. I want to hear a second one.
Please.
Absolutely, please.
Okay, well, it was when we were doing Toy Story Midway Mania, and I got to work with Don Rickles. When I was a kid, I was never really a big Rickles fan because he was, kind of harsh, and that was kind of his gig, and I wanted to meet him out front of Imagineering. And so most of the celebrities kind of drive their own cars in, but here comes this big black limousine down the street, and I knew it was him. And it pulls up in front of me, and there's a smoke glass window in the very back window. And the window goes down, and this little face behind the window, he says, get in! And it was Don Rickles. And so I get in, and we're late for the session because he spends 40 minutes telling me funny stories, just me and him. And he said, okay, Calvin, I want you to know something, and he's like, it was the most hilarious thing. Well, anyway, we had a vice president of estimating named Jeff Webb, who said, I hear you're working with Don Rickles. He said, I'm such a Rickles fan. I've seen him in Vegas. He says, I just love that guy. I said, you do? I said, yeah, he's such a sweet man. And he said he's doing this because of his grandkids, and he loves the character Mr. Potato Head, and it's just been so great. Well, I spent 33 hours with Don Rickles in the studio, and I got to know him pretty well. And Jeff's office was just down the hall from the recording studio at Imagineering where I was working with Don. I said, Don, would you do me a little favor? I said, you have a fan named Jeff who's just down this aisle. Would you just pop in your head into his office and say something? He says, for you, Kev, anything. And so I take him down the hall, and Jeff is sitting at his desk, and he's got his glasses on his nose, and he's looking through a million papers. And Rickles runs into his office and says, Jeff, look at this place. This place is a mess. You need a better office. You deserve a better. I know people. And he just went on and on and on. And Jeff just sat there with his jaw on his desk, didn't say a word. And then Don and I left, and that was it. It was hilarious. And so later that day, Jeff tracked me down. He said, did that really happen? It's hilarious.
Oh, man.
Oh, man. He's like, I had the weirdest dream.
Oh, yeah. I had this thing happen. I just still can't believe it happened. So stuff like that happened all the time at that place. We had lots of celebrities and lots of people in recording things all the time.
Wow. So I'm looking at your shirt, and it's making me think of cars. And so what was it like bringing cars to life in such a massive scale over in Disneyland?
Well, you know what? It's going to sound cliche, but it was like a dream, and it still feels like a dream. I mean, it's done, and it's epic, and it's there, and it was, 13, 14 years later, it still feels like a dream. At the time, when you think about it, there was never an entire land dedicated to one film franchise. But the real story behind that is that it didn't start out as Cars Land at all. How it started was, as I mentioned earlier, I didn't work on the opening day California Adventure Park. I had so many other things going on, but I did work on almost everything afterwards except for the Marvel stuff. But I was setting up a presentation for, I think, Toy Story Midway Mania, and Barry Braverman, who was the creative executive who in charge of the California Adventure Park, saw me in there. And he came in and he said, hey, Kev, would you do me a big favor? And I thought, well, sure, Barry, what do you need? And he said, we need a new attraction for California Adventure. He said, something that brings Disneyland DNA, a little bit more story and a little bit more detail. And he said, maybe it even turns into a whole land. Well, when you hear something like that that comes from a request from somebody that actually make that happen,
Hmm.
it was just crazy, and I said, yes, of course. And then I kind of got selfish because I realized that some of my colleagues, like Joe Rody, who loves the animal kingdom and the exotic and Nepal and all these great, animal kingdom, that was kind of up his alley. And Steve Kirk was the creative executive in charge of Tokyo Disney Sea, and he loved all the things that you see in that park. Well, I've always been like a big Cars fan. I'm a big California car culture, and I love classic cars. And when I was growing up, I could tell you every model and every color they came in and every manufacturer, and I just love cars. And so I started thinking, well, the opening day poster at California Adventure has a little C1, which is a Generation 1 red Corvette in the poster, but they never realized that. And cars are such a big part of the California culture.
Hmm.
The designs, and a lot of them are designed here in the car clubs and the shops and all that. And so I thought, what if we did a land that was inspired by cars, and maybe put it in the time period of like 1955 to 1965, where the automobile became less of a means of transportation and more of a form of personal expression and freedom, and that maybe we build a main street in that era. So kind of philosophically interesting. If you think about Main Street at the turn of the century when Disneyland opened in 1955, there were still people alive who said, "Oh, I grew up on a street like this. This reminds me of my hometown." There were still, it was far enough away to where it was interesting, but yet people would remember that. And I thought, well, at this time, I forgot when it was, 2003 or four or something. It's far enough. It's another 50 years away where a main street from 55 to 65 might be interesting along that same scale. And so I called that Cruise Street and started to come up with ideas for attractions that could fit into this whole land. One of them is Road Trip USA, because when I was a kid, I used to love going on road trips with my family, and we'd stop and look at the big giant balls of rubber band and all that stuff. So it was kind of based on that. So anyway, so I had a model being built for Carland, and kind of sold the idea, and somebody said, which just blew the brains right out of my head. Somebody said, "Hey Kev, Pixar is working on a movie about cars." Are you kidding me? Cars? Maybe there's something they're doing we
Yeah.
could put into Carland.
Hmm.
And so Robert Coltrane, who I mentioned before, in fact, a few years ago, they named Robert a Disney legend. Um, we were working on Toy Story Midway Mania, and I said, "Robert, come with me up to Pixar, and let's learn about what they're doing with cars." And so I set up a meeting. We flew up Southwest Airline from Burbank to Oakland, and we went to Pixar. And John Lasseter, who was directing the movie, and his team took us through where they were. They were still 2 years away from the film came out in 2006, and they were still 2 years before that. So they didn't even have the whole thing designed. An older animator named Bud Lucky just designed Radiator Springs for the film. They had Lightning, and they had Mater, and they had the characters designed, and they had the story figured out. And John and his team spent the day taking us through it all. It was just the most amazing day ever. And as a car guy, I was totally head over wheels in love with this thing. It was fantastic. And this is a true story, believe it or not. So Robert and I got on the Southwest plane back to Burbank, and it's an hour flight, maybe a little over an hour. And in that time, we had the idea for Radiator Springs Racers in our heads. And a few months later, we um, we kind of had the story sequence, and because we knew the characters and we knew the story of the film. And remember, this is 2 years away from the premiere of the film. And I have a special storyboard artist named Chris Turner, who's always been my good luck charm. And we got Chris in. Robert and I figured he's brilliant at figuring out the layout of an attraction and how it could work and dispatch intervals and stuff. You have to figure all this stuff out. So we had the story sequence for Radiator Springs Racers figured out, and actually sold the idea for Carland. And that was going to be our major e-ticket kind of anchor attraction for the land. In 2007, after the movie came out, John Lasseter called and said, "Hey, Kev, what do you think about turning Carland into Cars Land?" And, I had done like a couple of years of work on it and all that kind of stuff. And it kind of pulled the carpet out from under me at first. But then I thought, you know what? He's right. Because it's a parallel universe. It's another place. It's an immersive place where you can believe you can be. And started working on attraction ideas for Cars Land. And John actually arranged to have Michael Wallace, who's the voice of Sheriff, who wrote the quintessential book to Route 66, guide us, our small little Cars Land team, on a Route 66 trip for 11 days, looking at all the roadside attractions and the cafes and the diners and all the off-road stuff. And think about it, when you're designing a land like this, and you're a human being, you get to walk into Flo's VA Cafe. You get to walk into Ramon's. In the movie, you didn't get to go into any of these interiors, so we had to go out on Route 66 and be inspired with sketches and photographs of what these interiors and these other things could look like. And then I kind of cooked up the idea of Stanley's Oasis, inspired by, in the bonus film of the movie, John Lasseter's talking about Stanley, the founder of Radiator Springs, was a radiator cap salesman, and his radiator cap blew off, and he found the original spring, but nobody knew what that looked like, so we designed it. And then we continued that story. Well, Stanley sold radiator caps and invited his friends to come for drinks, and then he opened up a service station and gave them oil changes. And in those days, oil came in bottles, so we created the bottle house that you could queue through as a roadside attraction. And then Lizzie came into town, and Stanley and Lizzie fell in love, and then they created the Comfy Caverns Motor Court for the load area of Radiator Springs Racers, because Robert's my idea for the original load area for Radiator Springs was a Dynaco gas station, because it made sense that you'd get gas up before your road trip. But all that went away because if you were a camera in the movie going down the street toward the courthouse of Radiator Springs and you turned right, even though you did not do that in the movie, you had to believe that Stanley's Oasis always existed there. And that's how we designed it, that it would always exist there. And everything we did complemented the parallel universe of the movie. And then I had such a blast as show writer and creative director, but a show writer for the whole land, to come up with stories inside of like Flo's VA Cafe, where we got to elaborate on Flo and the Motorama Girls, and I got to create all these gold records with songs like Jeep Date, and that was no accident, and all cars related stuff, right? It was just It was such a blast. So I know that's a long-winded way of answering your question, but it was all just like it was mind-boggling doing that whole land.
What would it be like? Okay, this is very off topic, but what would it be like playing Dungeons and Dragons with an Imagineer? We just played this past weekend, and I like the amount of like just creativity, and I'm like, man, have you ever played?
No, I'm really not a gamer, so that's why I enjoyed working on Toy Story Midway Mania, because from expert to beginner, everybody's a winner. You didn't have to be a gamer. So
what I find fascinating with that story on Cars Land is that you had kind of identified Pixar's Cars before the movie came out, while it was still in development, which like if something happened and the movie didn't come out, like there's kind of a risk there, which I feel like typically you're designing things for properties that are already out. Like that's really fascinating that like you had this idea for Cars,
and
they're like, hey, we have this movie
too,
we had this movie, and you kind of started that ahead of time.
It's funny. Well, it's like I said, we've never done a land based on a movie franchise, but it kind of started in a totally different direction and ended up evolving into that. A funny story based on what you just said, Joe, was I work with Joe Cicero, who came from Disney Animation. He became an Imagineer, and he said we had some trailers out in front of Imagineering at the time where Ron Clements and John Musker were working on a new movie called Little Mermaid, which started the renaissance of Disney animation.
Right.
And Joe said, hey, Ron and John invited me to come over and look at some of these storyboards, and they have a cassette tape, a little cassette tape that they got from Elton John on Howard Ashman and Alan Menken I was thinking about Lion King, but on some of the songs. Yeah, some of the scratch tracks of the songs. He says, "You want to go see this?" And I said, "Sure." So we went over, and John and Ron took us to the storyboards, and I was just like, good storytelling, you get pulled into the spell of it, right? If you're sitting in a movie, you are in this. If it's good, you're in this spell. Everything goes away, and even as rudimentary as the storyboard sketches were, I was in the spell of this movie and I loved it. So I grabbed Joe and Cicero and I said, we got to go over to Randy Bright, who I told you about earlier, was a VP of creative, and tell him we got to work on an attraction on this thing. So we went running into Randy's office and said, we just saw this thing. It's called The Little Mermaid. And we told him the story and it's going to be the greatest thing ever. And Randy said, well, maybe we should wait and see how it does. Because, before that, we never knew. To your point, we never knew how they were going to go. And of course, that became the thing that turned everything around. But everything's a risk. Everything's a risk.
Yeah. Yeah. So, speaking of, you mentioned Elton John. Speaking of The Lion King, that is the movie that I burned the tape out. That's like the as a child, I watched it every day, and I'm the obnoxious person to watch it with. If I watch it with anybody, he hates watching with me. So, you mentioned Elton John. There's stories there. So, what is your Lion King story? You have them. I know you have one.
Oh, a Lion King story. Well, I remember as an Imagineer, we oftentimes got invited over to hear the producer or the director of a new film coming up tell the story of the movie so that we can start thinking about ideas early on. So a couple of years before the movie is even released. And I remember why I brought up the cassette was because we got invited over to Don Hahn was giving us a presentation on this new movie where he was a producer on The Lion King, and he had a cassette of Elton John playing some of the songs of that, and it's just such a privilege to be able to be invited into these early sessions where they're still developing these movies, and just hearing Don take us through the story of The Lion King was just a very memorable experience, second only to when Pixar was working on Finding Nemo. They took us through. Andrew Stanton was the director of Finding Nemo, and he did this one. I call it the one-man show, where Andrew stood there and took us through the entire movie with no visuals, just Andrew telling the story, and back to the point where you're in the spell of it. It was the most amazing thing, and Andrew just told us the entire story of the movie like three years before the movie even came out. It was awesome.
That's like Walt Disney style, right? Like
Yeah,
Disney
exactly.
was famous for doing that. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Were there any, like you said, you're kind of in there early on. Were there any attraction ideas that you had on any of these movies that were kind of early on that you pitched, maybe didn't get made, that you would have liked to have made?
They're the one that got away.
Well, we wanted to do that with Mermaid, but we never made it that far. No, not really, because based on a movie franchise.
Well, I guess even just any attractions, even if it wasn't based on a movie, I guess, was there any attraction that you kind of pitched that you would have liked to have built that maybe you never got to?
Yeah, one of them was an attraction during the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror days, and we were coming up with new ideas for new attractions, MuppetVision 3D and stuff like that. I had this crazy idea for a monster-themed attraction called Creature's Choice Award Show. And it was on the scale of like an American Adventure, where all of the creatures and monsters were giving Screamy Awards for the best performances. And to make a long story short, Godzilla shows up at the end to bring down the house.
Oh,
And
wow.
he literally does. So that was an attraction that I worked on for probably about a year and a half, and got it all the way to storyboard form, where we had flying saucers and sci-fi stuff and just crazy effects, and it was just this crazy show. And I remember Jeffrey Katzenberg calling me from the studio, and he said, I have Eddie Murphy coming in, and we're working on a deal for him. I want you to pitch this Creature's Choice Award show to Eddie Murphy, and maybe he'll be host. And so we created like this Eddie Franken-Murphy thing, and it was the weirdest experience I ever had, because Jeffrey brought Eddie Murphy in with his entourage, and I'm pitching the show to Eddie Murphy in the voice of Eddie Murphy. It was just the weirdest thing. But anyway, what happened was, like it happens a lot, as it always goes, is there's one bucket of money to put it bluntly, to go to a park for future development, right? So between Twilight Zone, Tower of Terror, and the other things we had in development for that park, the bucket of money was running out, and so Creature's Choice was so epic and so big in scale and so expensive. That was just an easy one for the chopping
for them to
block.
cut.
Yeah.
Okay.
But it was a lot of fun to develop, and that's just one of many attractions that got away.
Yeah. One attraction you did work on, you worked on the update to the Carousel of Progress, kind of in the 90s. You mentioned a little bit earlier you went to Disneyland recently, you saw the Walt Disney animatronic. They've announced that they're adding that to kind of the intro to Carousel of Progress. So kind of wanted just to get your thoughts on kind of what you thought about that addition and kind of them kind of going back and updating Carousel of Progress a little bit more again.
I'm glad you asked that, because I have an answer for you very specifically about that. I love the idea of Walt introducing the Carousel of Progress show, because he loved that show so much. And there's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow the Sherman Brothers wrote for Walt. That's really a song about Walt. And when I was, I brought Gene Shepard in, who did, the Christmas Story movie as the narrator and the father of the new Carousel show. And there was a previous song that was playing at the Magic Kingdom in Florida called Now Is the Time, but I wanted to bring back There's a Great Big Beautiful Tomorrow for one reason, because I remember as a kid, my dad would sing that song at the top of his lungs every time we went around the Carousel of Progress, but because that was really Walt's song. And I had heard people talking about, people are forgetting who Walt Disney is. And this was even back then in the 90s, he's become a name of a company. Who was the man? Mm-hmm. And so I kind of fell on my sword over having a video monitor out front that kind of paid tribute to the song with the Sherman Brothers and Walt, because I wanted Walt's presence to be known, because that show had a very, very special place in his heart. And I remember before opening day of that redo of that show, two construction workers were out there, and one of them was painting the railings, and he looked up and he said, "Is that guy up there Walt Disney?" And the other one says, "Yeah, I think that's Walt Disney." And he says, "I'm gonna have to bring my daughter over here because she doesn't think he was a real person." So in a weird way back then, with the redo of Carousel, wanting to introduce Walt to the story of that attraction, and in fact, and you can hear in Gene Shepard's narration, Walt was an American. He was more American than he talked about Walt. Well, this takes it up even better. It makes it even better, and for him to introduce that show, and as Richard Sherman fondly says, he says Walt was a futurist. He was so positive the future was going to be so good, and he made us believe every day there's a great big beautiful tomorrow on the way, and so. That whole, pun intended for the Carousel of Progress, it came full circle back to Walt again, right? So I'm very excited about that ad.
Yeah, the concept art, like having it be in his almost like workshop type thing to kind of like bring you in
with a
there.
sweater on, a blue sweater on, like he always wore.
It looks really good. So what we've talked a lot about a lot of the attractions you've worked on. You've worked on kind of countless more. What is the favorite attraction that you've worked on in your career?
Pick a favorite child.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, who's your favorite child? I really kind of love them all for different reasons, and for different team reasons, and for different challenge reasons, and for all the obstacles that we overcame to get there and all that. But I have to say, and this is as much as I love Cars Land and Radiator Springs Racers and Mater's Junkyard Jamboree and writing some of the songs for those and just everything on the Cars Land thing and the epicness of that, it's not Cars Land. It's Mickey Minnie's Runaway Railway. And the reason I say that is because that was kind of the cherry on top of the cake of my career. The backstory is, for many, many years, Marty Sklar, who was our fearless leader at Imagineering, I always promised Marty that we do a lot of stuff based on film franchises, but someday I want to do an attraction with an original storyline specific to a character, and just an original storyline, not necessarily based on a film story, like the reliving of a film story. And there's nothing wrong with that. People love the characters and they love the movies, and the parks very much have a place for that. But I always wanted to create something with original story. And over the years, Marty kept saying, "You got that story yet? You got that new attraction yet?" And the irony of it was, as I mentioned earlier, the Mickey attractions was always the hardest nut to crack because nothing was kind of good enough to bring Mickey into the park. In fact, nobody knows this, but Toy Story Midway Mania actually began as Mickey's Midway Mania. But
Okay.
he did not feel right in that venue, and the toys in that we came up with the toy thing like minutes after the Mickey thing because the toys lent themselves to games and toys better, and shrinking down to the size of a toy would be more fun. But the reason I love Mickey's is because, well, there's a lot of reasons. One of them is early on in the Disney Hollywood Studios, I met and worked with Jimmy McDonald, who was the voice of Mickey Mouse for 38 years, and he was a special effects artist. Every TV show and movie that I heard growing up, Jimmy provided all the sound effects to, and he performed them all, and he built them. Jimmy and his wife
Yeah,
never had any
was
kids.
it his wife that was the voice of Minnie Mouse? Was that?
No. That was
That was not
the voice after Jimmy.
Okay,
That was
okay.
Wayne Alwine.
Uh-huh.
And Russi Taylor was his wife, and they were Mickey and Minnie. Another little piece of trivia was Russi, who was a dear friend of mine. Her last performance as Minnie was in Mickey Minnie's Runaway Railway before she passed away. That was her last performance. She was really great. But Jimmy was not only the voice of Mickey for all those years, because Walt said, "I'm too busy, Jimmy. You do it." But Jimmy would spend weekends in his garage building sound effects contraptions. Like he would make things out of wood and put canvas on them and turn a drum, and the wood scratching on the canvas would whoosh, make the sound of wind, and he would create all these sound effects. And so we decided that nowadays you can get digital sound effects of anything you want. If you want a car siren, if you want a cow mooing, if you can find it digitally on your computer. But we wanted to do it old school Disney because it was Mickey. And so one day Jimmy McDonald, who was always a happy-go-lucky little guy, came in to Imagineering, and Joe Harrington, who was our Jimmy McDonald of Imagineering, he's our sound effects genius. He came in one day and he looked a little down, and we said, "What's the matter, Jimmy?" And he said, "Well, I think they're going to get rid of all my sound effects equipment at the studio. I think they're going to put it somewhere or get rid of it." And so we devised a little plan where we rented this big van, and we went over like Mission Impossible, and we took all of Jimmy's 60 years of sound effects and put it in this big van, and we have it all locked up in a cage at Imagineering now. Otherwise, who knows what would have happened to it. And guess what? We used all of Jimmy's old equipment to perform all the sound effects on Mickey Railway, including the original tritone whistle that was used for Steamboat Willie. When Mickey pulls on the rope and you hear the boat whistle, that's me blowing on the tritone whistle for the locomotive whistle in the attraction.
What?
And we performed every one of those sound effects. And so because there's so much kind of heritage in the Disney company and Mickey and Walt and trains and the history and all that, and because it is Mickey and Minnie and the Fab Five and their first attraction, that's that, and the team that I had for the original, and the Anaheim team was fantastic too, but the team that I put together was mostly Florida-based Imagineers who had never worked on an attraction before, and they just busted their butts to get that thing done, and they did it so well and so lovingly. We all owned it, and just the whole team experience, the attraction experience, all the obstacles of that, the history and the heritage, being able to bring that funny Mickey character in that Paul Rudish style into that world, and bringing them into dimension, and the music and the little earworm song, "Nothing Can Stop Us Now."
It's great. It's a great attraction.
Right? It's just everything about it. It was just such I'm really just so fortunate to have helped to deliver that attraction before I retired.
Yeah.
That's what a thing to launch off on.
Go
right?
out on top.
Yeah, it's like the white whale everyone chased, and you were the one that caught it, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's impressive.
Exactly.
I want to ask you on kind of looking back at your career, if somebody wanted to go into Imagineering, kind of follow in your footsteps, like what advice would you have for someone Maybe somebody, a young kid now that's like, oh, I want to be an Imagineer someday. What would be your advice for them?
Today was a lot different than it was when I was a kid starting out. I had a lot of opportunity. I kind of got my foot in the door and had just entry level positions. And I often joked around that, I couldn't get my job today if I applied for it. It just happened for me. It just happened the way it used to in the old days for people. Now it's a little bit different. But to answer your question kind of directly, what I would suggest is, what is your interest? What is your major? What is your core competency? Are you interested in sound design, like being a sound effects engineer, or a recording engineer, or a mechanical engineer, or an architect, or an interior designer, or any one of the like 200 disciplines we have represented at Imagineering, from finance to whatever? What's your passion? What do you want to do with your life? And then have a little bit of experience, and you can bring that experience to the table. So, for example, a mechanical engineer might work on a free fall ride at like Magic Mountain or something that's totally an iron ride, but an Imagineering engineer can take that concept and bring it into the story. We talked about that a little bit earlier. How does the story dictate what the design and the behavior of the vehicle is? And so come to the Imagineering table with something you love to do, whether you're a designer or an artist or a musician. We have a music department, or so many different things. And then you can learn to adopt that kind of core competency, that skill, into becoming a storyteller in the brand of Imagineering attractions. For new kids, in fact, I did a lecture this week at Chapman University down the street from where I live, a student hall of about 200 kids, and they often ask me that same question, and they say, well, I'm an engineering major, and how do I become an Imagineer? Well, today they have an imaginations competition where you can join with other students and create an attraction or something like that, and sometimes you're hired from that, sometimes not. But they also have internships, which they have had for like the past 10, 15 years. They never had when I was a kid. But you could try to go online and learn about the internships at Imagineering, and kind of focus your way into wherever you're interested, whether it be R&D or lighting, or you could be an intern in whatever one of the disciplines. And sometimes interns are hired that way. But when you think about when you think about all the careers in the world, they're all wonderful careers that a lot of people share. There's a lot of airline pilots, and there's a lot of Uber drivers, and there's a lot of servers at restaurants, and all over the world. But when it comes to Imagineering, it's just it's a tiny bitty little drop of water in the ocean of careers that are out there. And I don't know the exact number, but I would say there's probably worldwide maybe 15 to 1,800 Imagineers. And there's a billion people that want to do that. So it's also being in the right place at the right time, and really, kind of selling yourself on, this is what I have, this is what I can bring to your table. I know a lot about the Disney company. I know a lot about the parks, which is important. How can I bring that to Imagineering? So, not that it's easy. I just have this vision of giant dump trucks dumping resumes off at the place every day. It's not an easy thing. That's why, as I mentioned earlier, I feel so blessed and honored and privileged to kind of keep Walt's dream of the parks will never be complete as long as there's imagination left in the world. Being one of those people, being one of those tiny drops of water in the ocean of careers. It's just been astounding.
And you helped create the parks for people like us. Like that is some of a lot of those rides are just like absolutely like key. I could not imagine the parks without them. So like I appreciate that so very much.
Well, and we actually, because we're show people and storytellers, but we actually did it for you, because I have to say, honestly, I'm sincere when I say this. Disney park fans are the greatest, most wonderful, the nicest people on the planet. Really. You guys are. We love you to pieces. Disney theme park fans and guests are just the greatest people ever.
Well, thank you, Kevin. It has been an honor talking to you today.
Yes,
if people are interested in hearing more of your stories, again, the book is Magic Journey. This came out a few years ago, but a lot of great stuff in here.
Beautiful cover, by the way.
Thank you.
Yes, but thank you very much. We really appreciate it, Kevin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure. You can tell I kind of love to talk about all this kind of stuff. But thank you for having me. It was a real honor. I really appreciate it. All
right, I want to thank Kevin once again. Again, very generous with his time. Like you said at the beginning, could talk to him for hours about picking his brain. We'll maybe have to try to have him on again sometime just to talk about more just what goes into Imagineering. Like he got into some of like the details and the nuts and bolts of it. But just incredibly fascinating to hear, again, the person that basically created some of our favorite attractions, like the stories behind those attractions.
And the other thing that's it is fascinating to me, and it's not even mind blowing, but it's just like, it's a person. Like a person was able to do those things. Like he is
as part of a team, and he talks about a team
absolutely.
But,
but like the power of just like when people put their heads together, and like obviously he's a super intelligent guy. Like it's so evident from his conversation and just like how sharp he is and like remembering all of these details. Like you asked me what I had for lunch and I'm like, I don't know, but he's like, oh yeah, I remember this thing that happened this time. And like that, and I've noticed that like almost as a theme every time we talk to an Imagineer or an animator or somebody like that, like they're so sharp and remember so clearly those moments that I'm just like, I don't know that I would, in that same position, I don't know that I would be able to recall as much and as clearly as they do.
Oh yeah, definitely. And if you want to hear more about Kevin's story, you want to check out his book, we will put a link in the description below to his book if you want to check that out. But that wraps up the show this week. I want to thank everybody again for listening. If you've not done so, please leave us a rating or a review. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps and we really appreciate it.
Thanks for lending us your ears.
Have a great week, everybody, and we'll see you here next Monday.
Bye.